Hey everybody, we are live. So glad to be here today. Another exclusive episode of the Space Water Podcast. This is episode 53, exclusively here on YouTube. You can find my website at the mysticalspiralstore.com. Mystical Spiral Store is what sponsors the Space Water Podcast. This is episode 53, like I said, and we have our one and only guest of the month, I think, this month, because we were going to have Professor Chandra, but Professor Chandra, actually, you know what? Professor Chandra did reschedule, so we will have Professor Chandra back on. But Gary Wayne, so far, has been the only guest so far this month, and you guys have seen him many times on my show, and you will see him, hopefully, if God willing, in the future many times as well. Guys, we have been doing a show together for almost a decade now, and it's been really a pleasure to grow and hear Gary all the time. You can find Mr. Gary Wayne at Genesis6Conspiracy.com. He's got a series of books of the same name in the series, Genesis 6 Conspiracy Series. This is book two that he just released, and these are bestsellers. But everybody, if you're just finding my channel, today we have new people all the time, and you're just finding about Gary Wayne. Gary Wayne calls himself a Christian contrarian. He's a best-selling author, and he talks about the mysteries of the Bible and many other religions related to Christianity. And we're going to be getting deep into a topic today that basically can relate to some of the backbone of the reason why he does his books, and that's about angelic intelligence affecting humanity and the offspring of angelic intelligence affecting humanity. And from what I feel, it's not just that it happened in the past, it continues to happen right to this very day, right now. So, guys, let's welcome Mr. Gary Wayne back and give him a cyber round of applause. Thanks for joining us, Gary. I'm glad you're here today, and it's a pleasure to have you back on the Space Water Podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and so happy to be back, and hopefully to cover some material that isn't as well covered as what you and I tend to jump into and talk about and get people to think about. So I think it'll be a good show for everybody, and I always enjoy getting into these kinds of discussions because everybody's trying to figure out what is this world all about? What is all of this different views on almost everything, and how do I walk through that? So that's kind of what we try and do, I think.
Yeah, and trying to discern some of the information that's out there is important as well. It's very important. And I over the years, I think we've sort of I feel like I've evolved with it and how to discern a little bit through it. It's a process. It really is a process, and it's a pleasure to be able to go over some of this information with you. I figured we should start off before we start off of about some of the angelic intelligence that has maybe possibly communicated with mankind and even shaped and molded mankind, and some of the people in and out of the Bible that have possibly communicated with angelic intelligence. Maybe we could talk about some of the forms of angelic intelligence, whether it could be, forms of light, channeling, angelic intelligence, even veiling themselves as human. There's all possible things that we can go into with that, but also maybe we could first talk about how the angels came down to the planet, what they were called, maybe in the Bible, how many are actually mentioned in the Bible, and then some of the books that are connected to the Bible that have angels affecting humanity. Maybe we could start with
Yeah.
that because it's such a big topic,
Oh, it is.
you
It
know.
is. And those are all really sort of good questions. So I think if we want to understand how this world works, we have to understand that there's a visible hierarchy and organizational structure that we kind of see visibly that's out there. We may not understand what's in behind them as the puppets of the puppet masters. And the puppet masters are the invisible hierarchy that can make themselves visible. So it's important to be able to understand and discern the differences and how we know that this actually exists, particularly when we're talking about that invisible hierarchy that can, at least in the past, have made themselves visible. And I think they'll make themselves visible as we go into the end time, no matter what faith or persuasion or religion that you believe in, there's an end time in all the belief systems except for secularism, and that's actually polytheism. The seculars just don't know that. And that whether they're gods or they're angels, they're the same beings and they're going to be visible on both sides at certain points in the end time. So we need to sort of understand how this kind of works. And so when we talk about how, these gods, how do we know from a Christian perspective that gods are fallen angels? Because a lot of people would say, no, they're differently, and that there's no such thing as an angelic female, for example. There is in the physical world for sure, because we know that even in the Bible, you can have like goddesses like Anat and Astaroth, and they're female in a female format, in a physical form. And you have the male gods like Baal within that post-Diluvian hierarchy of the gods, the Baalim council. Baalim is the plural for the Baalim, for Baal gods of that council, who rule from Mount Hermon biblically and from the Ugaritic texts. And then you have the post-Diluvian um, gods as well. But understand that they have a hierarchy. Hierarchy means sacred assembly of archons, coming out of the Greek. An archon is one of the groups of the angels. So
Yeah.
this is a term that's known inside and outside the Bible and permeates our language. So we have this hierarchy of these beings, and then we have their offspring that is recorded everywhere in the world. It's the physical offspring, although you will see offspring gods within the polytheist culture, whether or not they were able to create physical gods or not that were a lower level. I think not, because they rose up to destroy the parent gods in their religion. So I think they had to be of equal power, so they couldn't be inferior. It just doesn't sort of make any sense. But they
That
did
makes sense.
overthrow,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's just an allegory for how the offspring gods like Zeus and Anki and Enlil and Baal and Osiris come to power, and it's the same story all around the world, right? So, and the other ones are either dead, as you would take it out of polytheism, or from monotheism in the pit prison, because you can't kill something that's immortal. But they might as well be dead because they're not able to interact until they're released in the end time again, which is really important to the discussion. So,
Yeah. So I
and
was
if
wondering too, you think that even though that some of them were imprisoned, which we can talk about, they couldn't, from their imprisonment, still in a way telepathically affect the consciousness of humanity?
in certain situations, we know they can from a biblical perspective, and I would say from a polytheist perspective, they have lots of accounts on that. In Ezekiel 32, you have the Pharaoh, who is a terrible one and a mighty one, and he is of the bloodlines of the giants. So he's a physical post-Diluvian giant and or descendant of a giant. And he's talking with two different groups in the pit prison. It's and they're having this conversation, and the two groups are the mighty ones that were slain for doing terrible things. These are the terrible ones while they were still alive, and they're in the sides of the pit prison. And then the strong are the is the Hebrew word El, E-L, for an angel or a god. And it certainly isn't going to be a loyal angel that's in there, and it's not going to be God's most high that's in there, because there's multiples of these, and they're communicating with the Pharaoh about another terrible one with Nebuchadnezzar, who's going to come in, totally upset the world order and replace it with his own beast empire.
Wow.
So
So
yeah,
glad you
so
brought that up.
so we know this can happen. How extensive that might be out of the pit prison might be isolated to descendants of the giants or their offspring, and of sort of pure bloodline and nobility, or it could be extend with rituals and things to others. But we can't say they don't have any communication, because biblically we have that example, and we have lots of examples in polytheism. But from a Christian perspective, it's the biblical example that crosses over for understanding for Islam and Judaism because it comes out of the Old Testament. And even the Quran says everything written in the Bible is accurate. So it's very few things you get a consensus on in this world. So there are these beings. So, and there's a whole group of them, and we don't know what they all look like. We only know what some look like a seraphim, which is serpent-faced, four-faced cherubims, four-faced ophanims. And we get archangels that seem to be human-like in some of the angels. But so with the top of that hierarchy is you have those four groups of what they call watcher angels, which again is in every sort of understanding, whether it's the alien mythos, or it is within polytheism, or if it's in the Bible. And we get Watcher that shows up in Daniel 4 times for these sons of God who had authority on this earth. That's part of the hierarchy that and the authorities that they have. So seraphim, archangel, Ophanim, and cherubim are the four at the top. And then underneath, you're going to have, under the archangels, you're going to have mighty angels. And archangels are like Michael and Gabriel, the only two listed in the Bible proper. And then out of the KJV original Apocrypha, you're going to get Raphael and Uriel, which are four now of the seven archangels listed in the book of Enoch. So you get now we don't get the other ones named from the Book of Enoch, but we get these seven archangels that show up in the seven angels of the trumpets and seals and of the wrath bowls, and I'm thinking these are archangels. So I won't go into a long deliberation as to how I get there, but that's kind of what I'm thinking, particularly with the trumpets, when we know they're associated with the last trumpet and an archangel that's talked about in the New Testament. So you get that direct association. So you can at least for sure say the archangels are involved on the trumpet, seven of them. And one would presume they're going to be part of that seven, just as you have the four presences out of the book of Enoch and the four spirits that come from the presence of God. These are four powerful archangels that are the four winds of prophecy that are talked about in the Bible as well. And they're the ones like Gabriel and Michael, for example, are going to be directly associating with Israel. And in Islam, that's the angel who dictates the Quran. Whether people accept that or not, I'm just saying that's what it says in the Quran, that that information and the knowledge is given to them, to Muhammad, by
Yeah,
Gabriel.
Gabriel, right? Wasn't
Yeah,
Gabriel the one that held him like in a silken cloth
yeah,
and did all that?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I just start again making sort of connecting some dots. So underneath you have the mighty angels, which we would know not from the Hebrew because we don't get that as a full understanding in the Old Testament, but that's dunamis angels, and these are under a military hierarchy of archangels. And it's a
Like
pillar of
Maruts,
authority.
like
Yeah.
the Maruts or something, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And just as Michael fights with Persia and the beast kings, right? And he holds back them bringing about the Antichrist. Not that cherubims don't have a warrior capability too, but through a different authority as this column comes down. And underneath the dunamis are the dominions. And that we would understand that word as Cortaci or Cortasi. Yeah. And so these are ones that would be more responsible for uh, the lower level aspect of the archangels in the military order, and then angels underneath that. They'd be like the foot soldiers, right?
So
So
this would maybe even be like nymphs and things like this, like those dawn maidens and
no, no, that's into the visible hierarchy.
visible hierarchy.
Yeah, as the
Okay.
offspring, as you take, because even when you take those creations back, they come from the gods and generally human females as well. Um, so that's the one hierarchy. Then if we move over to the seraphim, you have principalities, which is arche, where archon comes from, right? And then underneath that, so when we look at the dominions, when we look at a dominion, that's like an empire. That's like a military empire. I should have sort of explained that a little bit more and control over that. Principalities uh, under the seraphim. Seraphim are responsible for religion and government. So they're the ones that are control the government. And then underneath the arche, you're going to have again more angels or malak or angelos, as it's in the Greek. Malak is the Hebrew word for angel. And then under um yeah, I might have mixed that up with where the principalities are under as rulers and arches. That would be under the seraphim as well in their category of ruling. So they have both a government and a religious column that comes out of the seraphim hierarchy. So the rulers, the principalities, or the arche are the government side of that authority underneath the kings. Um, and so the seraphim are the serpent-faced angels, and under there they have the powers in their second level versus the principality in the other column coming from the seraphim. And that's generally understood as exousia in the consistency of the Greek language. And there's one other loose angel that is called Icarus that's talked about in the
Greek.
New Testament and Revelation in Greek as Icarus for these mighty angels, which seem to be different than the dunamis. So they may be a special order of very powerful, mighty angels
Yeah.
within the archangel hierarchy. I don't know quite where to place them because they
Was
just show up there.
was Icarus the one that wanted to fly towards the sun?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and he's gonna, yeah, it's interesting because there's a reference similar to that in the Book of Giants where they wanted to fly towards the sun
yeah,
and they said no. There's a reference like that in there, and I found that in one of the, I don't know if it's in the Manichean or the
yeah,
Aramaic, I
yeah.
forget which one, but
And Baphomet in that tradition, as part of his Baphomet title, is Icarus as a mighty, but he's a degraded seraphim angel as a goat god, right? Which is a consequence of some of the watchers for the rebellion. So that's kind of the general hierarchy with the angels being messengers, ambassadors, and foot soldiers in the basic three columns. And the Ophanim, which is the other one, sort of presents as the throne that is part of each of those uh, hierarchies. You start at the top with Satan's throne room, and then each of the seven angels, the more powerful angels, would have their own throne rooms. And then as you get into the 70 nations, you have an original throne room of the 70 nations assigned to specific gods. Then as they have extensions, those you have more thrones that sort of come down. So that sort of operates within those other structures as providing not an inferior but a lower throne room that has a hierarchy up to the top as well.
and to clear it up for so people could get sort of an image of what you're describing. I mean, these are celestial hierarchies, so they might come in the form of things that we don't realize, like planetary systems and star systems, and that might be like what they might look like in this physical representation,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
like you're talking about celestial hierarchies here, celestial domains, celestial thrones.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And that everything is sort of goes back to that format. So when you see what's being manifested physically, it's going to parallel that
Yeah.
assembly as well, right?
Yep.
And so, every nation has their own king and queen. And a nation that would, let's say they took another piece of land or set up a subsidiary kingdom or a realm, that would have a throne room as well, but they're answerable back to in the hierarchy
Yeah.
to the
And
main
and
throne room,
And
right?
what
That
what we might be called that what we might call that throne room is like Orion's Nebula or something like this. But what it actually is a celestial throne and with
yeah.
chambers. and
Yeah.
sections in there and hierarchies and systems, right? That's incredible.
Yeah, so that's how we need to sort of understand it. So the physical realm, typically at the top of the order are their physical offspring that were the Nephilim or the Anunnaki before the flood and the all the different names around the world. And then the offspring gods as well after the flood when they create giants. So that's the top of the order. Now, probably would suggest that because there's a distinction between some of the offspring gods in their size and their power to the antediluvian. This is my speculation. Because there's that distinction between Rephaim and Nephilim from a um, biblical perspective, I think the Nephilim are a higher order than the Rephaim after the flood.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so you would have probably two categories within that.
That's how I look
Um,
at it. Like the Rephaim are like creations of the Rephaim of the Nephilim.
some people look at it that way.
Almost like the Nephil. It's
Yeah.
almost like their offspring, it seems to
Yeah.
me.
The Ugaritic text would say they're the offspring of the offspring gods, which makes them lower. Just as the offspring gods are lower than the parent gods, it would be a similar parallel to that. So in the Sumerian tradition, you get offspring gods creating giants like Gilgamesh after the flood.
Like I throw
Um,
the Rephaim in with all the like the Amalekites and all of those tribes,
yeah,
and
and
then
Zeus creates giants like Hercules after the flood. So
so would I be wrong in looking at like those tribes like the Amalekites and the Hittites and all of those tribes that have the like giants and the Rephaims and all.
yeah,
I look at um the gods as their like the like Anath and all those gods as their parents, and I look at
yes.
those as Nephilim.
Well, Anat is a female goddess, a fertility goddess, the
Yeah,
queen of heaven. She's not.
she's like a fallen angel. She's like a
Yeah,
fallen angel, and
yeah,
so her first offspring would be Nephilim, maybe.
yes. So the only way you could get there from a lower sort of level is if the parent gods did physically create offspring gods in this realm.
So, like an
But
example, would
yeah,
Atargatis be an example of the fallen angel, and Semiramis being now a daughter of Atargatis?
yeah, Semiramis, and we're talking post-Diluvian
Yeah,
gods right now. So Semiramis would be a hybrid
yeah.
likely versus with more human content
That's
and
what I mean. So,
giant
would you call
content.
Semiramis like a Rephaim?
No,
No, so she would be like some kind of hybrid tribe, similar to the Rephaim,
lower than Rephaim.
lower than Rephaim.
Yes,
Okay,
but higher than humans, and their size would be smaller than Rephaim too, but bigger than humans. So those are the
okay.
so when you have Rephaim intermarrying with human females,
That's important to describe the
yeah,
difference. Yeah,
that's part of that hierarchy as well. So when you have Timna marrying Eliphaz,
yeah,
Timna is a Horim female creating a new dynasty with the Amalekites. That's lower than the Rephaim. And because there's a distinction between the Rephaim and the Nephilim, I would put the Rephaim lower than the original giants created before the flood who had more gifts and power and size.
yeah.
So,
That would be
and
the
I would
last
look,
of them.
yeah, and I would look at the fallen angels, in this case, Baal and Anat, as, they're shown before the flood as well. They just take power after the flood. And so I don't think they're physical offsprings, although you have to leave it open because that's how they're described. I just think they're just part of the hierarchy. And they moved up once the other ones were removed. And now in the polytheist side, they kill those gods and move up, but it's the same result. So when we look at the physical hierarchy, let's look at it this way. Nephilim at the highest level, pure blood Nephilim. Now, when Nephilim remarry other Nephilim before the flood, I think that's a lower level hierarchy within the Nephilim. Now, there are some accounts where before the flood, some Nephilim intermarried with humans to create hybrid giants as well, but we don't get that many of them. And they didn't really have a requirement for that because they could produce in great numbers before the flood. They didn't need to do that. And they were there to destroy humankind. So there wouldn't have been that many. But after the flood, we have the Rephaim. They're going to intermarry, as what we talked about, with Timnah and Eliphaz, and also Esau, who's Eliphaz's father, and Aholibama is
Yeah.
also a Horim from the pureblood, the Horim giants in the Edomite area. So we need to understand that hierarchy just of within the giants, right? And so when we look at uh, Rephaim who have this fertility issue, and I think that's manifested in lack of females, which is why they use them to start new dynasties, is that they have to continue to intermarry with humans. And so that becomes part of that, let's call it scioned or grafted in ennoble part of the bloodlines just for their own survivability so they don't go extinct. And then you have other creatures that the fallen angels are going to create as well. So you were talking about like sylphs and nymphs and nereids and all of these four groups of elementals. Elementals in the occult are the bottom of the hierarchy, with the three little ones. And there's three groups of little ones, the mischievous ones like leprechauns, right? You have good looking ones, and then you have ugly ones like trolls and gnomes.
Yeah.
And these are the Stoichian, as they're called in the New Bible, in Galatians and Colossians, that enslaves us in this world. So they have this physical presence. When they die, if they're not provided a new oikotarian, they would become part of the demonic hierarchy of the invisible ones, just like the disembodied spirits of the giants would be part of the demonic hierarchy of the invisible ones as well. But while they're physically here, they're part of the physical hierarchy. And the fourth one in the elementals are the salamanders. And they're all equated on all four of these elementals with the basic elements of the earth, like air, wind, fire, things like that, right? In the occult. So salamanders are a reptilian being that are larger than humans, but not giant size. So then you might have some other creatures that are created as well
Slith.
within, yeah, that have a kind of a different sort of positioning in there, depending on their creation. And even in the occult, it's hard to get a complete mapping out of all the different creatures that they created. So,
Yeah.
you know, if let's say Bigfoot is part of their creations because they're before the flood, after the flood, same kind of legacy as the Nephilim, then where would they fit in?
Yeah. I mean, even in Italian, you have all these mischievous little beings like the Lincetto
Yep.
and all these stories. Like I remember, I've heard stories when I was a kid that supposedly if you have like a lot of different things, weird stuff going on in your house, you can even throw out like scatter matchsticks around your bed or around your bed at night on the floor because certain beings that will spiritual beings come in your room, they don't like the mess. They'll be trying to pick them up
Yeah.
all night or
Yeah.
something like that. There's all these little lores about that.
Yeah. And then I'll throw one other complexity in this. We don't know whether or not um, angels that weren't watchers procreated. But in Pistis Sophia, we get depictions of these archons, and that's a Gnostic gospel in the pit prison that don't fit in anywhere in the category. But we don't get descriptions of all the different angels um, within the hierarchy that were provided in the Bible. So you actually have one that has a bear's face. So if you're looking for one that might fit the Bigfoot, that would be a classic one that would fit as a procreator of Bigfoot. So if it's just restricted to the watchers, then you're going to have more limited in terms of the looks of the species that they're creating. But we don't know what Dunamis looks like. We don't know what Icarus looks like. We don't know what Arche looks like. We don't know what Excusia looks like. So there's those ones that are in that second level that could have produced as well. But again, we don't have information, but what was stopping them from? If they were already rebelling, and they wanted to be all in, why wouldn't they reproduce? But unfortunately, we're left to speculation on that. So if you now look at that as being producing giants that are in the hierarchy, then there's a hierarchy within that as well, right?
Well,
And then if
it,
elementals reproduce with elementals, they would create
yeah.
a hierarchy within that as well.
I have a question with what you're saying, and I think there's a couple of questions in the chat room. So, like in at least in like Hinduism and Vedic, they talk about how every god has a Shakti or female power
Yeah,
or feminine side, if you want to
yeah,
say,
yeah,
right? I guess in Hebrew they would call like a Shekinah,
yeah,
right? So do you
yeah.
think that this could be what we're talking about, like the sort of
No,
like like certain gods have feminine aspects that we're seeing here,
no, I wouldn't quite get there because you're looking at it from a physical.
like or angels. I mean, angels
Yeah,
could
yeah,
they could take a male
yeah,
representation or an
yeah,
intellect or a
yeah. So
female intellect.
you're looking at it from a physical construct, physical world construct. The original home of all the gods, all the fallen angels, all the angels is in the spirit realm, and they're a spirit being. They
Well,
not
that's what I'm
they
talking about. I'm saying that the
uh,
Shakti, yeah, the spiritual energy is
yeah,
a
you need
spiritual energy.
you need to let me finish because
All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
it's the nuances are important on it. And in that physical realm, they're already immortal. They don't need to reproduce. There's no need for sex. It's only in the physical world where we die that you have to have an ability to reproduce. So when you have an angelic being that has the ability to take the form of a male or a female, they have their choice to do that, then you're seeing that whatever that uniformity of that being is in a spiritual sense is can be modified to a influence or a dominance or a choice that on how they want to be perceived. So the reason why you want to be so careful with this is that the mother goddess in polytheism is like the Holy Spirit. And all the polytheist religions make those connections. That's a blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. So, as a Christian, we want to be careful of that, but we don't want to dismiss that there's female gods, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying that they're not gods; they're angels.
Well, an angel and a god are the same thing.
Yeah, they're
And
looked at as gods. Yeah, I guess to some,
yeah, they're
but
just called gods, and
they're called
in
gods. Yeah,
they're
I know
called
what you're
gods,
saying.
but and the definition is El means God or an angel or the God Most High. They're these spirit beings, right? There's a hierarchy within that spirit realm, but they're all spirit beings.
All right.
So, and but also understand that um, this female aspect of it is a very important part of polytheism. So, when we look at the Holy Spirit, for Christians, know this so that you don't get caught in it. Is that that word in Greek is Sophia? Sophia is the mother goddess of
Yeah, wisdom, I guess, because that's what it means in Greek.
wisdom. Yeah,
Yeah,
wisdom is Sophia. So when the Holy Spirit gives you wisdom, or is called wisdom, um, understand that that's just the Greek word for wisdom,
yeah,
right? Even though the Holy Spirit provides wisdom in the New Testament. We want to be careful that we don't confuse the Holy Spirit with a mother goddess. That's for a Christian,
yeah.
and for and we would advise others that is a line you don't want to cross because the only sins that are not forgiven are blasphemies against the Holy Spirit.
I agree. I agree. What I was saying is that Gnosticism and many people are and Hinduism and all of these belief systems, they have a Shakti, right? That they have
Mhm.
that spiritual side of them, that female aspect of them.
Yeah,
So
they
that's what I
do.
was trying to, yeah,
They do, and that's just. But they have the ability to project either, so it's
yeah.
what they're choosing to project.
Would you consider because people were talking about in the chat room asking about the Ijiji. What was the question
Yeah.
that they have? Is it Gigi's along the lines of the Grigori and the fallen angels, right?
Yeah, so Grigori is a watcher in
Yeah,
Greek,
the Watchers.
right? Yeah, and watcher is Drakont or Drakonta in Greek for a dragon. Seraphim watchers are serpent-faced, six-winged dragon angels. So watcher is this common thing. So the Nether gods, for example, in Egypt, that's defined as watcher as well. And all of them are that have that watcher relationship. So a Giji is related to as a watcher in the Sumerian pantheon and the Sumerian language that would be akin to the Anunnaki. Whether it's a different distinction between the watchers, that's up for debate. But a Giji is sort of the superior of the Anunnaki, as they're referred to in separate sort of contexts. But also understand that their offspring with the giants were also called watchers, Igigi, not necessarily Igigi, but certainly Anunnaki. Now, Igigi, what's that word mean in Sumerian? Means comes from G-I-G-I, Gigi, for an eye, or as in to watch. And so again, all of
So
the
cool.
terms, yeah, all of the terms and connections are talking about the same kinds of beings.
Watchers of the gates.
Yeah, watchers of humankind.
Yep. Watchers of the
Watchers,
winds. Yeah. Watchers of
yeah.
it, the dimensional realms and too.
What?
Watchers of the
Yeah,
portals.
yeah,
Watchers
and
of
and
everything.
and with the authority that they were originally provided, they have authority over the physical realm and everything in it. And when they rebelled, God permitted that to continue for a time. And so biblically, we're told that this is what happens. And Satan, as he's understood, as his degraded adversary title, is the prince and the god of this world. In
Yeah.
fact, he was when he was talking with Jesus in the desert, he was saying, because he has the authority, I'll give you every kingdom in this world if you worship me.
Wow. Well, yeah,
They have, right? They have authority over this world for a time. They do. We need to understand that. Doesn't mean that God doesn't intercede, but he's letting things play out and only intercedes if it's required so that all the names of the book of life that were written in it from before creation will have an opportunity to leave their name in or have it blotted out. That's the only intercessions that are made while
wow.
all of this plays out.
Well, a lot, some Gnostics even say that they claim that there's 360 heavens and all of them are evil, you know?
Yeah,
So, I mean, that would mean that anything attached to this that has to do with Earth and heavens of Earth are all evil realms.
yeah.
That's it's a lot to take in.
Well, but
Yeah.
if they, depending on how far you want to stretch, they have complete rule over the physical world. Is that outside the firmament, or is that just within the firmament, or is it just the earth?
Yeah.
And what are they actually fighting for that they would settle on? So, but if you take it as an understanding that they have complete authority over all of creation, that's the whole physical universe.
Yeah. I mean, I don't take all of them with a grain of salt. I mean, some of them have, I think, advanced knowledge in there. It's just the metaphors that people are misunderstanding. Like
Yeah,
when even you look at the different the the Jewish heavens,
yeah,
like the lowest heaven that they have like is called the upper waters.
yeah,
And it has like winds and
yeah,
clouds. I mean, that's
yeah,
describing like the stellar wind, the solar wind, and the upper waters above Earth and all. I
yeah.
mean, that to me, that's incredible.
So yeah, so you're going to hear there are three heavens biblically, and seven heavens as it's understood in polytheism,
Yes, yes,
right?
yeah,
Biblically, it's nuanced. So you have the three. The three are where the spirit dwellings live, what's under the firmament and in the atmosphere, and what's outside the firmament. Those are the three positions. Now, there are these gates or portals outside, I think,
The same
but
place
could
we
be
have the
in,
ISS, by the way, Gary.
yeah, could be inside the firmament in that heaven high up or outside of it, but there are gates for those things to come through that you're talking about, like the hailstones and all the four that are out there that can enter into this world. So three from a strict doctrinal understanding, but when you get into what those other four are in polytheism, they're all talked about in the Bible that come through these gates and windows and
Yeah, I
portals.
agree. I mean, they even talk about like storehouses of snow and things like
Yeah.
this. And
Yes.
the Oort cloud is like that.
Yeah.
That's the last ring, Taurus ring around our solar system. That's so crazy. It's like a storehouse of frozen comets.
Yeah.
It, they talk about this right in the Bible, and these can be considered like the hierarchies of angels that we have and many messengers of God.
Well, angels would be assigned to those storehouses
Yeah,
or, whatever you want to call them.
departing
That,
from them, right?
yeah. Yeah. They would be just as the angels are assigned authority over the weather.
It's incredible.
Everything that operates in the physical world has an angel over top of it with a hierarchy. So if we again, how far do you want to stretch the authority of the fallen angels that they have? Is it just the earth that was reeled back to, or does it control some of those other places, at least the door opening aspect of it to get to it? We don't know because again, we don't really have access, for written specific knowledge that we could say, hey, we could do that as doctrine, but you can certainly connect some dots. And again, if that is outside the physical world through those portals, that's a different understanding. If it's part of it, they may have access to that. So yeah, it's really, I like to be very careful in there because things that are going to happen in the end time for signs, this is where it gets important to understand is people are going to see signs in the skies from two aspects, one from God, one from the fallen angels. So if they're going to do things that we can't believe is normal for the physical world, that means they would have access to those storehouses
Yeah,
or they're able to counterfeit it. But if it's something that is going to count that be a sign that is completely out of the laws of the physical universe, that will be coming from God. And so it'll be interesting to see what those things are, where
yeah,
they say they're coming from, and is
I
there
agree.
a scientific manifestation, even if it's high level technology for it, or is it something that goes beyond that?
I
That's the
agree.
only way to discern what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about in the Bible, Gary, how in the future there we're going to be drinking from that a living in Hebrew they call this the Mayim Chaim, the living liquid or living waters.
Mhm.
And that we're going to be these living waters are going to be coming over the earth and maybe we'll be drinking from the well springs of salvation.
Yeah.
Do you think this is possibly a light that's going to come over the earth in the form
You
of
know, it's hard to know because that's after there's a new heavens and earth that's going to be created biblically. And it's designed to give us immortality in both the physical and the spiritual realm in our physical bodies. So it may be akin to what Adam and Eve had, where they had access to the tree of life.
yeah, it almost sounds like a global DMT awakening of higher knowledge. Like something's going to roll over
Yeah.
humanity.
But whatever it's going to be is it's going to be something different than the tree of life because you're exactly right. It's going to be the water of life that's going
Yeah,
to be provided. And so, but because we don't necessarily have a reference to what's going to be created anew that is designed for beings that and and it may be part of the bringing home of the spiritual realm so that you don't have to go back and forth through dimensions, right? I mean, But if there is a separation, then there's something new that's being created, and we're just being provided terms that we have no ability to understand
Yeah.
what's behind it. So,
Yeah. I feel like something's coming March 21st through March 29th of this year, like right now, this next like, because we on March 21st, we have this equinox coming, and then March 29th, the North Pole is going to be plunged into darkness with eclipse. And it's just something inside me that feels like some kind of something's coming. And that coincides with what we've been talking about
yep,
with the externalization of this
yep,
hierarchy of
yep,
2025. And some
yep.
people think the Kali Yuga is ending on March
Mhm.
21st, 2025.
Well, and also, you have the um, coming up, and it comes up yearly, but it's more important, I think, right now, where you have the red heifer, Sabbath of the red heifer, which is just before the Passover, and the Jewish people are looking to sacrifice that in preparation for the Messianic period, right?
Yeah.
And so there's lots of things pointing in
I
that
don't know if it's called the
direction.
Yehudim. Yehudim? Is it called the Yehudim? There's some kind of name for the rituals that they do. Yehudim or something, I think it might be called or something.
Yeah, we're not provided a ritual term for it in the Hebrew in Numbers 19. Red heifer only shows up there. Um, uh, but it's something that has to be done in preparation for the Messiah, right? And if the Messiah is coming, then the temple's going to be built from a Judaic belief system. And so there's going to be there's becoming a hyper anticipation that's out there, and that this year is bringing in this new year, just as you had this jubilee of 25 years that the Catholic Church was celebrating and it has celebrated. They use 25 years instead of 50.
The Pope's about
Uh,
to die, I think, too, right
yeah,
now.
yeah, and they opened the gates,
Yeah, right after
right?
he opens the gates,
Yeah,
it like took his soul.
yeah.
It
So,
took his life force.
yeah, it's hard to know. And so we seem to be crossing into a threshold of something different. And then we see all of the geopolitical anxiety that's going on out there right now. And that's going to just heighten. It all plays into this whole movement towards world government, world religion, and the in the last 7 years. So now we have to understand that there's going to be events that look like the last 7 years, but we're not there yet. There, it's like a birth pang. It's the same pain, but it'll get stronger as
Yeah.
it goes. And so we'll see lots of antichrist figures. We'll see lots of false prophets.
Yeah.
But
Well, do you think
we
it
need to
could be
see.
right that there's 300 years, like, because the Hindus say when the Kali Yuga ends, there's 300 years of transition till the next cycle starts. So do you think there could be like starting like right now in 2025, we're going through like 300 years of turmoil?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. The timetable of the Bible is a generation. That if
Hopefully.
Yeah, and what starts off that fig tree generation? So that would be 40 years, 70 years, or 120 years. That's kind of the maximum time that we get for a generation. So if we are in the sorrows, then we're in the shorter aspect and way shorter than 300 years. So
Yeah,
uh,
that's what I feel too.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like it's going to be between 2025 and 2040.
yeah. But the thing
Those
is when we look at things coming out of antiquity, is it years or is it cycles? And then what is the length of a cycle that's being, because everything is related, and you know this as well, because you've talked about this many times. Everything is circular in nature,
Yeah,
and so the time cycles are expressed in some sort of cycle. And it doesn't have to be a year cycle. It could be a 30-day lunar cycle, or it could be a celestial precession of over 2,000 years cycle, right? There's different sizes of cycles. And so that's the thing that makes it difficult in translating time frames out of antiquity is if we don't have the reference for the length of the cycle, then we can't make an accurate assessment on how long or short.
Now, when we get into how angelic intelligence has affected mankind, the Bible doesn't really, well, the Bible has, of course, accounts where angels have affected, talked to humans and done
Yeah,
certain things. But when it comes to what specific angels have done what, the Bible doesn't really have that much information. We get a lot of that from the Book of Enoch, which
yeah,
is an apocryphal book,
yeah,
right? So, and also I've looked at some other books that have things like they actually have a dictionary of angels that I have. I don't know if you've ever seen that,
yeah.
where
I've got a few. They're all
yeah,
different, but
yeah, where
they have
they
crossovers. Yeah,
this one is Gustav Davidson.
yeah, I've got that one.
Yeah.
Yep,
So in his dictionary of angels, he has the Watchers as a high order of angel, like the Grigori, known as the
yep,
Grigori. And then
yep,
he has all of this, basically like Araquil, Aramaros, Azazel, Baraquil, and some of the names I've seen in some
yep,
writings,
yep,
some I haven't.
yep.
So, do you want to get into some of that and how, maybe who they could have communicated with and who they could have created? Because, I mean, I have seen Barquiel, who in the Dictionary of
Yep.
Angels says taught astrology
Yep.
and things like that. And I saw that name right in the Book of Giants.
Yeah, and in First Enoch, and a lot
Yeah,
of those other names you talked about were in the Book of Enoch as
Enoch.
well.
Yeah, yeah, Enoch. Yeah,
So one of the things we always have to be careful of is you have different names for angels or gods in different religions, and we also know that the MO or the pattern of powerful kings, powerful people, and gods, they had as many as seven different names. And that makes it a little bit difficult to sort of track. But the common number is seven powerful ones, right? Kind of at the top, or you could get as high as 12 when you get into some of the, um, let's say the 12 Olympians, both before and after the flood. Some of them are only 10, but there's a limited number of the ones at the top. So when we look at the interaction, though, we need to go back to the understanding that when you have a god that's mentioned that would have lived before the flood, whether or not we have a corresponding name for that angel or not, that God is still a fallen angel. So, ever since the creation of humankind, is where I'm going with this, there's been this interaction of fallen angels.
yeah,
We've been intertwined in this drama ever since we were created. And what's also interesting is that there's another being that is influencing Adam and Eve in Eden. That is the serpent, which is Hebrew Nahash, source word Nahash, which means um, an enchanter, and words like that as in a sorcerer. So this is a priest or a priestess, which implies the fallen angels had rebelled before that point in time because they had converted all of these beings, and it's a beast of the field, and the beasts of the field are created in day six before the humans are created. Now, that could be up to 1,000 years for that one day, as Second Peter talks about. And Second Peter is also referencing a world that was in the water, that was out of the water, that was destroyed. So you might even have the angels ruling, and the wars destroyed the world before that. So when we're talking about interaction of fallen angels or gods with humans, this goes back into a time period we may not know how long that is, but from our beginning, for sure they've been interacting, and that nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. So that doesn't mean there weren't other beings like us before the world was destroyed by fire. That's been reserved for the end time because the world perished at that point in time, as Second Peter 3 talks about, and the flood didn't destroy the whole world, just the land animals. So that's not that destruction. And it's talking about this destruction of fire that was in the beginning that's reserved for the end time. So just the concept here, I want to sort of underline is this interaction with the authority that these angels had.
Yeah.
And wherever you want to put that rebellion, let's put it before Adam and Eve,
All
because
right.
that's already in place.
Yeah.
And that no matter how we look at theories before that, from the Adamites forward, they've been
At least.
influencing humankind from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. And to enslave us, I think, as like you say in your books.
Yeah.
You know, it's not
Well,
to.
to have us destroyed from the face of the earth, because the implication is, and they knew this, is that they're created because of the rebellion, and that if whatever's going to happen were to succeed, humans would now be raised higher than angels as the inheritors of eternity,
Yeah, giving us
and the
the ropes to
angels,
hang ourselves.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so they don't want us to reach our destiny. So the only way you can stop that is to have the humans destroyed.
Yeah, and they're giving us the powers that we can't truly understand or have the knowledge to wield, and we're wielding them to the high heavens.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think they created the giants to ensure we didn't choose our destiny.
Wow.
And so that the reason why God brings the flood is because there's a period there with an antichrist type figure with these cycles that nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again, with giants, with the gods walking amongst humans at that time, that that angelic technology was at its peak, that had the ability to destroy the world by fire. And so that's why the flood comes, because that's reserved fire destruction for the end time. And so the angels would have been looking at a world that they turned totally against God, except for the eight that are on the ark, and had essentially succeeded, except that the eight survive, but the rest of the humans were wiped out. And right up to the time of the resurrection, they're trying to do the same thing again. And now they're just doing it in principle to destroy as many as possible because they know their fate is sealed.
Yeah. It's incredible. It's intense. And we're right in the thick of it right now. Right?
Yeah,
We're
so we need to understand that interaction, which is where I think you wanted to start with. But I thought we should lay down a premise for why it's
yeah.
important to understand this interaction. So we're intimately interwoven with fallen angels. We just don't know it.
Yeah. And we don't know who can also be veiled as an angelic being,
How do
right?
you mean as veiled?
They can veil themselves either as or
Yeah.
into a human.
Yes, they can. And we get that like in Hebrews 13, be nice to strangers lest you run across an angel unaware. We
Yeah.
see them as humans throughout the Bible, as in Sodom and Gomorrah. They're two physical bodies of a human. They also show up in different formats where they can be recognized as an angel. Um, and they can be terrible to look at in terms of the not terrible as in you're fearful of the power that this being might have, how that would be understood. So it's important to know that they can materialize in any form that they want, and many of them, are here now, at least the loyal ones, as humans. So it's important to understand those concepts.
Yeah.
And and even
Go
if
ahead.
even if we're just dealing with the spiritual entity here, typically um, we don't get that many interactions as this unknown spirit interacting with humans, right? But we do have the Holy Spirit that does that. But that's sort of limited to an, uh, an essential part of the triune. So when we look at voices and things, we want to be very careful with this, and we want to be very careful with every spirit that we might come in contact with. And so the reason is that they're here. There's ones that are sent from God to help us, and there's other ones that are sent to deceive us, but not by God, but by the fallen hierarchy. And so we need to test the spirits. Now, I don't believe a fallen angel is necessarily doing and saying the same things that demons do. Fallen angels know the power of God. So they like to have their offspring do the dirty work, do the
Yeah.
killing, do the blasphemy, do the horrible things like the beast or the Antichrist will speak like. These are like beast spirits. So First John 1 says to test the spirits and do not believe every spirit. Okay, so we need to know that. And we're asked to test it by asking whether it's from God or not. And that every spirit, and so by inference, we should be asking, do they believe in Jesus as the Redeemer who came from God, who was crucified, was resurrected, and all of that? But it says to test them whether or not they're of God or not, and all spirits of God will confess that Jesus came in the flesh to save humankind. Those who do not are the spirits of the Antichrist. Spirits of the Antichrist are demonic spirits. And I do not believe that fallen angels would ever put themselves in a position to blaspheme God or any of the triune. They're very, and even angels are very careful in terms of how they speak that are loyal. When Michael is challenging Satan over Moses' body in Jude 1, he's very careful in the language that he's using.
That's interesting. Yeah. I like that you're saying that. Yeah. Well, Saint Paul, was it Saint Paul in the New Testament who called them the principalities?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Principalities are arche.
Yeah. The arcane. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's very interesting. Very interesting. So we have people also outside of the Bible that I wanted to talk about too, that we could get into, that may have or may have not have communicated with either fallen angel intelligence or offsprings
yep,
of fallen angel intelligence. I know some religions have been created about it, and ironically, a lot of them were happening in the 1800s,
yep.
and
Yeah,
some of them even in New York that I'm aware of, like that I've researched. Like I know Joseph Smith was in New York.
yep,
Another guy that I
yep,
mentioned that book, OWASP,
yep,
that guy John McBrow, he was a dentist in 1880s who all of a sudden started channeling light
yep.
and angels
There,
were giving him knowledge.
there seemed to be almost an apocalyptic sort of spirit in the late 1800s, right?
Yeah.
1850 to about 1900. And with that, a lot of communication and the startup of other religions and breakoffs from other religions based on that communication. And so um, it sounds very similar to what would happen in the Bible, but the question is, what are they doing that would be different than what's in the Bible, right?
Yeah. I
That
mean,
would
it
be,
happened way before that too. I mean, John
yeah,
Dee was doing it.
yeah. Yeah, and we know there's communication between the demons, and one would think, and I think from Ezekiel 32, for example, and with Satan, that there's a communication still permitted from the fallen angels, maybe not in the same physical, intimate form as they did before the flood and shortly after the flood, but still an interaction. And so there's an interesting thing in terms of how you can do that. One, you can do that through seances. Um, you can do that through lots of different forms of rituals. You can do it through drugs. You can do it through yoga. You can do it through lots of different things that to put you into contact with it. But what's interesting is with a lot of these things that happened in the late 1800s, it wasn't like we're being told that they're doing all of this process to put them in that position to receive that information. It's just it
Yeah.
happened, right?
That's what I find interesting because it's to me it's almost like there's some sort of evil connotation that when you're seeking it out using like a like a Ouija board or something like that, and you're
Yep.
seeking it out, right? But when you're sitting there and you're a dentist, like with John McBrow, I showed you the big book last when we were
Hmm.
speaking privately. for instance, like with him in 1880, he awoke one morning to find his room filled with beings in the form of pillars of light.
Yeah.
He was a dentist. He
Yeah.
wasn't somebody into the occult. And they instructed him to buy a typewriter.
Yeah.
And he sat for an hour each day with his fingers on the keys and he
Yeah.
typed all that.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that he typed was the Van Allen belts before they existed and things like this. So he was getting
Yeah.
knowledge from something that
He
was,
was, yeah.
yeah,
And those are similar accounts to information being downloaded even from John Smith. It was like literally
yeah.
dictated to him, right?
So supposedly Moroni told him to go get these tablets, and this was in
Yeah.
upstate New York as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah. So again, I mean, it's not that, probably a lot of the information, would be from a physical word understanding accurate. But what the goal is of providing that information is what you just sort of need to get into. Um, but we need to understand that there's that communication that goes on, and maybe there's cycles where more of it can go on. Um, so one of
you
the
know,
things,
won't before. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
yeah,
off.
no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
The one thing I wanted to point out too is we brought up the Alice Bailey with the celestial hierarchy a lot, but
Yeah,
what we tended to forget about mentioning is that how she was getting this information is she was supposedly channeling of somebody that she called the Tibetan, this
yeah,
guy Dawaj Khul,
yeah,
who was supposed to be in like some samadhi state in a cave,
yeah,
just channeling her information.
yeah,
So
yeah.
this sounds very similar to a giant in stasis.
Yeah. So again, that's the distinction between some of these accounts to other ones where they're physically going out to make this communication. So when you can have through your seemingly through your genetics and your bloodline more encounters, spiritual encounters, even though you haven't enticed them to come. It's part of that genetic sort of makeup from the giants that comes down in the Rh negative and the various genes, whether or not it's the the LB gens or the Julia gens or the Creta gens or all the various gens around the world that they're more prone to that. And surveys done by NASA, done by many other ones, they list all of these different traits that people would have of this. And it's the gene that produces the blood type. So it's more the gene than the blood type. So you don't have to invite them in to have more encounters if you're of that genealogy. But typically, if you're if you have to invite them in is the traditional way. So you may have done a ritual that may have opened that up and you didn't know it. That's another possibility.
How do you feel
But
about the Fatima encounters then? Like when, you have these young girls that
yeah,
they're shepherd girls,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then all of a sudden,
Again, that's not, I mean, any of those accounts, I don't find any associations where they're inviting them in. That's why you have to recognize,
it's
as
their
we're
blood.
talking, that it could be the bloodline,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe their blood. Yeah.
Or it is and when you look at the Mary apparitions, this is a larger interaction than just a demonic spirit.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just on a whole different scale. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter whether it's Medjugorje, it doesn't matter whether it's Fatima, Lourdes, all of these Mary apparitions are on a completely different scale.
It's one of my biggest areas of study my whole life that I've been fascinated with.
Yeah. So that suggests to me more angelic and from the fallen angels, based on the doctrines that come out of it,
Yeah.
which is one world government, universal religion,
Yeah.
things like that, and that they're preparing prophets to come out into the world for the most part. So yeah, there are different encounters, and so, but that's the difference when you're starting wanting to discern. Angels are going to do things demons can't do. It's on a whole different scale. Now, as technology increases, this creates other possibilities of interconnections with both. We get images, not images, but examples in the Bible. I don't know whether you're familiar with the term teraphim. I think you are, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it literally means a talking idol and a family idol. and or an image. And it was also associated with household shrines for genealogical
Yeah.
worship of demonic spirits for the most part. And what's really interested in, even though the number is 8655 and there's no lettering that is even similar, its source word is 7495, which is Rapha,
Wow.
the source word for demonic spirits.
Yeah,
7496
that's
Rapha and 7497 giant.
demonic
Eh,
spirits that don't sleep.
Yeah, and so in the KGV, you're going to get that with Teraphim as a talking idol, and it's translated exactly as that. But there's other ones where it doesn't translate as Teraphim. It's just saying as an idol or an image, and it undervalues the nuance between the other idols. This is something unique, and you get an account between Rachel and Laban,
Oh yeah.
um, right? And as they're about to leave and go back to the covenant land, that she steals her father's teraphim or idol, and it says idol or image there, images there, and that's the word teraphim, and this is a family idol. And Laban goes back and creates this great scene because she stole the most important item he had. So this is some way, some sort of oikotarian for a demonic spirit to speak through, or technology that we don't understand that's been lost. And you also get some passages where, like in the book of Samuel, in the time of David, where they're dressing up this kind of like body-like figure in a bed, and that is taken back to the Hebrew word teraphim as well, even though it's going to be images as the word that's being used there. And it's an image of a body or in a human form of some sort to fool some other people, but it's a walking, talking, not a walking, but a talking idol. So we have to be careful of that concept as it comes through with the technology as well. That may be what is possibly will be powering the AI. That's where I get concerned.
Yeah, well, that's what I had titled the title of this show today, that angelic intelligence, the real AI.
Yeah.
'Cause I actually think that all of the technology that we're wielding is was given
Yeah.
to us, to
Yeah.
preoccupy our lives, to enslave us to it, to all sorts of different reasons why.
Well, and what's really interesting as well is that the jargon for these invisible algorithms behind the programs that ultimately
Yeah.
guide the agenda and the
Preach,
objective
Gary,
of the
preach.
program is called daemon algorithms, which is the Greek word for demon.
So crazy. All the
I
stuff
mean,
that they use. Even
yeah,
even NASA's named like certain telescopes that they've had on Mount Graham, like Lucifer and things
yeah.
like that.
Well, everything, I mean, everything in science is named after the pantheon of gods and their history and their gods and their offspring. So, I mean, the Apollo program, the Mercury program, everything goes back to honoring the gods, right, in science. And so we need to understand that in the end time, there's an image of the beast that's a talking idol. And that would be a definition for a teraphim. And this is a highly advanced technology. So there's some things that demonic spirits can take as a dwelling place for their spirit to communicate. But typically, this isn't being done with angelic beings. But this beast image, this is something that would be as spectacular almost as the image of Mary. It might be on a whole different level, and this might be some sort of angelic representation in terms of its technology, but again, on a different level than the lower level of demonic technology that's being provided to us today. And again, what I think that image has the ability to go is interdimensional. and to be in contact with the divine essence, to be in contact with the Atma particle, with the Brahman, all the different terms for the source of all knowledge, so that they can start to provide um, physical
Yeah,
immortality in the physical world.
for sure. I truly agree. I 100% agree with that. I mean, there's so many stuff that we probably do too, just because like a lot of the saints that had sort of
Yeah.
angelic encounters, and how do you feel about physical manifestations of so-called angelic encounters or encounters with Christ, even with some of the saints, where they came out of the experience with something like a physical manifestation, like a stigmata or something like that? How do you feel? Do you think this is from like a direct angelic intelligence or some sort of what do you think this is going on? Is it a psychological thing because of somebody's
Yeah.
devotion to it so much that they're devoted to the act of Christ, that they're putting in his
Yeah.
shoes, that they're having some sort of psychological manifestation? Could it be just
Yeah.
psychological, or do you think it's a spiritual manifestation of angelic?
Well, I would say anytime you're getting a lasting image that people will raise up to worship, essentially, or as an intermediary for their worship, that's probably not coming from a loyal angel or from Jesus or the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, a
Um,
trickster.
yeah, I mean, they're not going to violate the laws of the covenant.
Yeah. So do you
They're,
think that there would be a demonic sort of being who would veil themselves as the image of Christ?
a demonic would, an angelic wouldn't.
An angelic wouldn't. That's right, because it's important that we mentioned earlier that they're careful with how they offend God,
Yes, very
right?
careful of that power. Yeah. And demonic are not, they're beast spirits, right?
Because
That's what they do.
there's accounts where saints have had visions of Christ and they come out of this experience with
Yeah.
stigmata and stuff like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. And these beast spirits, they slander celestial beings. The angels would not do that, whether fallen or not, but Antichrist will,
Yeah, I think it's
you know?
important for Catholics to hear that because
Yeah.
you know most of the Catholic saints have encounters like that.
Yeah. So, and I know, we're not subject to all the laws of the original covenant as Gentiles, but they're not going to lead you to break any of those laws. If you have the Spirit in you, you're led to fulfill the laws of the covenant, even though you may not be bound by them. Um, but no, they wouldn't do anything to create to create idols of anything in heaven or on earth. I mean, it's pretty explicit not to do that. So yes, you have to test the spirits, and then you have to test the product or the fruit of what comes out of that, and they have to match if it's from God. And typically, most people who get deceived, they, and even with Christians, I mean, people say, well, the Holy Spirit taught me this. And I'm going, well, that's good. Did you test the Spirit? And they say, well, why would you ask me that?
What a
Well,
great question.
yeah,
What a great question to say to
yeah.
somebody.
And the reason why I say that and I explain to them is that because the Holy Spirit or Jesus or God or a holy angel, whatever the Spirit was, would not tell you something that's in contradiction to what's written in the Bible. So your insight, although novel and interesting, if it's not consistent, it's there to deceive.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree. And I mean, there could be people
Yeah.
within the church that had legitimate encounters,
Yeah.
but I do think that a majority of the saints that it was a trick. They were tricked.
Yeah.
They
It's
were tricked,
and
and then they were
that's
worshipped as gods, like godlike beings afterwards.
yeah, and again, we don't even know whether the people are lying or not. I
You
mean,
don't even know if it's true or not. If they were just trying
yeah,
to get people, to coerce them in a way,
yeah. So that's when I'm listening to people, and I'm not here just to shoot down everything that people say, but when somebody says they're a prophet of God, or they talk with God regularly, and this was what he says, and I have the authority. My red flags are up. Not that I don't want it to be true, but okay, that's fine. That's rather unusual, but why doesn't it line up with Scripture? Well, I'm here to rewrite Scripture. No, you're not. You're
Yeah.
not. And when people do, even with like passages in the Bible, and the church is really bad for this, is they reinvent what it says. They say, don't believe your eyes of what it says.
Yeah. Yeah. But priests do this as well.
Yeah, that's just absolutely craziness. Or if they get into prophecy and they say, well, I'm going to use a prophet detail over what
Yeah.
Jesus said.
Yeah. Rabbis,
Seriously.
that's what I get mad about certain Kabbalistic texts
Yeah.
and Hebrew texts because a majority of their Kabbalistic texts are just commentaries about what rabbis think the verses mean.
Yeah. That's the Talmuds, right? Or the
Yeah.
yeah, not the
So
Talmuds. I'm trying to think of the word for the
Midrash, they got
yeah,
Midrashes,
yeah.
the
All the editorials that are on the
Zohars. Yeah,
Bible.
I know
Yeah.
what you're talking about.
Targums.
Yeah.
Targums.
Yeah, the Targums.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're editorials, which is fine, interesting, but don't use that as doctrine.
Yeah, it's like commentaries about rabbinical
Yeah.
debates about what they mean and all this stuff
Yeah.
going on. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's sort of very, very important to do that. And it's just amazing to me, you know. And the other thing I like about what Jesus talked about with his eschatology for the end time is he includes the Old Testament in it. In fact, he tells us to go to Daniel to understand these times, because that's the most clear, concise, short passages to get the whole sort of last 7 years.
Yeah. And the teraphim that you talked about
Yep.
isn't we found like different Asherahs, like these little clay figurines,
Yeah.
those are a good
Yes.
example.
Well, yeah, if they could communicate.
They're like small clay figurines of nude women that they kept in houses,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, be like familiar family idols. But the difference would be you can have a
It-
family idol
yep.
that's not a family talking idol.
Yes. Yeah. That's just like a clay figurine that's
Yeah.
worshipped on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what's interesting on those voodoo titles, and I think we talked about this on the show, the Egyptians would make clay representations of the Anakim on pots and then smash them.
Yeah.
Like
It's crazy, right?
they hated the Anakim giants. They must have been just brutal to do war with.
Yeah, but if it only somebody could be a fly on the wall in some of those times,
Yeah,
they have a new show coming out on Amazon Prime, I think called The House of David or
yeah.
something. Are you gonna check that out?
I've been told it's really, really good, and it lines up a lot with some of the stuff I wrote in book one in terms of some of the extra biblical things that are being written about,
They
that I
have
wrote about
Goliath and
that
the
are in it.
giants in it, and his
Yeah.
giant brothers, I think.
Yes, yes.
But
So I cover that off in detail. So I haven't seen it yet, but I'm told it lines up very, very well. And I thought, when I was writing the book, do I want to put this other stuff in that or not about David and his connection to Goliath and the mothers and the lineage and
yeah,
how that sort of works? And I thought, well, just in case this comes up down the road, I'll just throw it in there. It's a long book anyways, just so they've got the sources and understand what the Bible says, and then the add-ons, and then where they intersect and where they don't intersect.
yeah,
But there's a closeness there that is just sort of brings the Goliath story to life. Here's one of the things that I forgot to get in earlier when we're looking at understanding the difference between fallen angels and demons. The Old Testament recognizes this, and that, in Psalms 106 and Deuteronomy 32, it talks about devils that are sacrificed to, and this is the Hebrew word shade or for a spirit or a demon spirit. So people worship demon spirits. They may not realize it is, versus the devils that are in Leviticus 17 and 2 Chronicles in the Old Testament, which is satyr or satyr gods, which are a separate god, a degraded god, and an angelic being that, that are different than what the shades or the sheds are. And that the devils that Jesus is exercising while he's here, which are also called unclean spirits and are evil spirits. They're also called devils, but it doesn't go back to diabolos, that's used for translation as devil for Satan in the New Testament. It goes back to daemon spirit. Two different levels of spirits, two different Greek words used for a specific reason. And of course, daemon are the same spirits that Jesus is exorcising out that a lot of the people in Israel were deceived into worshiping.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, so don't think that they can't make themselves off to be gods. And that's the hero worship that was done in Greece, where the hero died and they used to do sacrifices and rituals because the disembodied spirit of the giant was so
Yeah.
upset that it couldn't physically interact anymore, it would come back and haunt
I think this,
that
yeah,
community.
yeah, they would, yeah, that's so incredible. Like and I think that's what exactly what even Emperor Nero was infected by, something like that.
Yeah,
They said, you know, the stories that go with how he was buried. They buried him beneath a walnut tree in the plaza, and then when the local witches stopped doing the ritual around the walnut tree,
yeah.
then the area started getting infected by evil spirits. And then in 1599, when the Pope became Pope Paschal became the Pope, the first thing he did is went and cut the walnut tree down, and then it really released the freaking evil,
Wow.
supposedly. And then when they cut the walnut tree down, they thought it was just a myth, but they pulled the roots out and they
Yeah.
found Emperor Nero's bones beneath there.
Wow.
They did
Wow.
an exorcism on it and threw them in the Tiber River.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, when a polytheist society in the time of Nero is going to those extraordinary ends, that this was a terrible one of such incredible proportions. It might have had the Antichrist spirit in it.
Yeah, supposedly they buried his bones,
Yep.
and on top of it they planted a walnut tree, and then every year the what they call the Benedante and the Malandante, the good and the
Yep.
bad, once
Yep.
a year the good and the bad would unite to do a
Yep.
dance around this tree. And then over
Yeah.
the years it stopped happening. People stopped believing in it. You know, and then the evil
Yeah.
started to arise again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how, people don't believe what happened in other generations and then they say, oh, that was a mistake.
Yeah.
That's like we never learn our lessons.
Yeah. It's incredible. It's incredible. Well, Gary, it's been a pleasure having you here again. I can't wait to have you back on again. Guys, we have Gary Wayne on at least once, mostly now twice a month, and this is really a pleasure and a special blessing to have him here. So please support Gary. Please support my channel. And Gary, we welcome you back on anytime. I love to be here with you, man. It's a pleasure to spend time with you.
Terrific. It's been fun and hopefully we've connected a few more dots for people today and
Yeah, I
given them
think
a
we
few
could do a
things to
part
think
two.
about. Oh, I
Yeah, I
think
think we
so
could
too.
do a
Yeah.
part two to this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, Gary Wayne, Genesis 6 Conspiracy.com. Pick up his books today. You can